Patrick MacLeamy was an employee of the architecture firm HOK for half a century, the last 13 years of which as its CEO. He is currently serving as chairman of Building Smart International, which works to achieve open standards for the exchange of digital information. Patrick joins us today to discuss his new book titled Designing a World-Class Architecture Firm and published by Wiley. Welcome to the Weekly, Patrick.
Thank you very much for having me, John. It's a pleasure.
Let's get right into it and with a basic question about what has fundamentally changed about architectural firms from when you entered the business to the current situation.
Yes. Well, of course, some things have changed dramatically and other things seem almost the same. When I entered the profession in 1967, and I was trained classically or traditionally, I learned how to describe a building, a three-dimensional building on two-dimensional sheets of drafting paper. And now we're designing buildings on the computer and we're designing them in 3 dimensions using various BIM tools, building information modeling tools. So that part is changed dramatically, how we describe buildings for contractors. The other thing that's changed dramatically, I think, is the regulatory environment. When I began, there were building codes, and there are building codes today, but now the building codes are much more complex. And they're not only about life safety, but they're also about protecting the environment and the safety, the occupational safety of people inside from things like toxic gases from carpeting and so on. And also, I would say that the getting a building permit, getting a building approved by a regulatory agency is probably triple the effort than it was when I first began. Getting a planning commission approval to build a building, we didn't have environmental law then, so getting an EIR approved if that's necessary. So these have added months, sometimes years to the design process. The things that are the same, John, are curious. One is that owners still mostly hire architects separate from contractors and because there are 2 contracts to design one building, it tends to pit the architect and the contractor and put them at odds, make them opponents instead of partners to design and build a building together. That's beginning to change, and I think more of that needs to happen. The other really curious thing is that the AIA average firm size when I began in the practice was about 8 people. And today, 50 years later, it's still 8 people. So, we have a very fragmented industry with very small firms, thousands of small firms, small architects, small engineers, somewhat larger contractors, and only a few large firms. There are more large firms today, of course, than 50 years ago, but
sure.
I thought by now there would be a great consolidation in our industry, and it has not yet happened.
Do you anticipate it will happen?
I believe that it will. I think that there's huge pressure on our industry. When I say our industry, I don't mean just the profession of architecture. I mean our industry to deliver good buildings, better buildings at an affordable cost in a reasonable time frame. I mean, I think people are used to buying a car, a computer, a smartphone, or a pair of shoes by knowing the price ahead of time, knowing the performance that you'll get from that, whatever you're buying, and being able to get it in purple, green, or yellow. And when people go out to buy a building, they don't know any of that. They can't be guaranteed or assured of the performance. They might be able to be guaranteed of a color, but they're certainly not guaranteed a price. And I think that our industry is under great pressure to evolve and become more like the manufacturing industry. And the great challenge for architects is, how do we keep design in that mix? How do we keep design, which is what we're about? How does design survive in that, what I think will be an inevitable transition?
Your book lays out how a firm can be quote unquote designed. What
Yes.
are some of the ways that you believe lead to creating, sustaining a world-class company? And conversely, what are some of the basic mistakes firms must avoid during that journey?
Yes. Okay. Well, that is a great question. The 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 premier founder of HOK was George Helmuth. He's the H of HOK.
Mhm.
He was the son of an architect, grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, which at the time he was growing up, St. Louis was the fourth largest city in the country.
Hmm.
And his father and his uncle had a practice in St. Louis designing work for the Catholic Church and mansions for well-off St. Louis families and a few small commercial buildings. And the firm was called, pretty typical, Helmuth and Helmuth for the two brothers. And he watched that firm go from plenty to nothing and plenty to nothing, boom and bust cycles. They would get a project to design. The two brothers would have an argument about who gets to design it. They would hire some draftsmen. And about the time the project was completed, they had the draftsmen trained to be more effective. The project would be finished. They wouldn't have new work. They would lay off all the draftsmen and be back down to the two brothers. So young George Helmuth saw this. He called it a roller coaster. And it was a searing experience for him because growing up, when his father and his uncle had work, the family had plenty of money and he was able to live a middle-class life. And when they ran out of work, there was always a time for belt tightening. And he was determined to join his father. He wanted to be an architect from the very beginning, from when he was a little boy. And he graduated from Washington University, a good private university in St. Louis, determined to join his father and his uncle, but had the bad luck to graduate in the year 1930, the beginning of the Great Depression.
All right.
His father and his uncle didn't have work. They couldn't bring him on and as a partner or junior partner in the firm. So he went to work for the city of St. Louis as a junior architect, designing comfort stations and park benches.
Hmm.
And he did that for 6 years. And every year he would go back to his father and his uncle and say, "Can you take me on now?" Finally, after 6 years, his father said, "We don't really know how to practice. It's pretty clear. Why don't you go to a big city and find out from a big firm how to practice?" And so he left St. Louis and went to Detroit, joined Smith, Hinchman, and Grills. That's the forerunner of today's Smith Group.
No. Okay.
And Smith, Hinchman, and Grills was busy designing work for the big three auto companies. Automobiles had become the thing, and the big three were building assembly plants and office buildings and so on. So he became, started as a junior designer, but but they discovered in him a natural salesman. And so they put him to work in their marketing department. And firms did have marketing departments then, but marketing was thought of as a kind of dirty word for architects in the 30s, 40s, 50s. And Helmuth thought more about how to design a firm that would not have this up and down. And he presented 4 principles to the senior leadership at Smith, Hinchman and Grills, and they rejected it. They said, "We just need the next job. We don't need a strategy." So he quit and formed his own firm with 2 people that were in his office, Minoru Yamasaki, and Yama was, of course, the designer of the World Trade Center later on in New York City, and Joe Lineweber. So it became Helmuth, Yamasaki, and Lineweber. Not a household name today, but that's the forerunner of HOK. They started their practice based on Helmuth's principles, and I'll just briefly say what they are.
Okay.
First is, if you want to have a sustainable practice, you have to attract and keep good people. Give them a chance to get trained and to grow up in your firm and become more and more valuable as they learn and become more expert at what they do. And in order to attract and keep good people, that's the first principle, and it's the key, attract and keep good people. Second principle, in order to attract and keep people, in order to keep them, you need steady work. And steady work to Helmuth meant you had to have somebody devoted in leadership 100% of his time to marketing, backed up by a strong public relations effort. So Helmuth was, we think, one of the first partners in a firm to go full-time as a marketer. He did not design, he did not produce the work, he marketed. That was the second principle. The third principle was that each one of the partners needed to be a specialist instead of, as his father and his uncle, if one of his father or his uncle brought the work in, then they designed it, and the other one supported, and they fought like cats and dogs about it too, and they criticized each other's design work and so on. Helmuth said, let's separate out the partners. Let's have one partner design, one partner that's really good at it, market, and one partner and responsible for production. And he said, if you do something every day, you get pretty good at it. So let's keep the partners separated and let them focus on their areas of specialty. And the fourth principle, which I think is the most interesting of all for Helmuth, is this. He said, you have to diversify your practice. In the days when his firm was first starting, all the architects were busy designing schools because of the post-war baby boom. And he said, school work is going to run out. The baby boom will become, that bubble will pass, and there won't be any more new schools, and we better learn how to design other buildings. So the firm, he made a distinct effort to market anything except schools. And he told his partners, you can design and do all the school work. I'm going to go after office buildings and courthouses and airports and prisons and every kind of building type you can imagine. He extended the idea of a diverse, and he said, the reason is if school work is down, maybe office building work will be up. If airport work is down, maybe hospital work will be up. So diversification was his primary driver of a steady practice. But not only in building type, he also said we need to diversify geographically. If work is slow in Detroit, where the firm was started, maybe we can start a new office in St. Louis, where I'm from, and that branch office will have work to keep the Detroit staff busy, because it goes back to his first principle. Let's keep those people employed, let them grow up in the firm and get more valuable. So you diversify geographically, you diversify by building type, and finally you diversify by the service that you offer. Not just architecture, but interior design, planning, building engineering, and so on. And so that mantra of diversification has been the driver for HOK ever since. And the idea that the partners, the leaders in the firm, and the leaders now in each HOK office all have different responsibilities is true to this day. The only difference is that instead of 3 leaders, design, management, and production, we have 4. We have marketing, design, and instead of production, we have technical architecture and management. That role is too big for one person, and George Kassebaum juggled the production work and managing the firm's business, relationship with the bank, insurance, and so on, all by himself for the first 25 years. So HOK is a reflection of that original vision, and it has been, even during tough times, the recessions and depressions that have happened since, HOK has continued to either level off its growth or to grow more slowly during difficult times, and then during times of plenty to grow faster.
You make the distinction in your book between a leader and a manager. Can you define a little bit more clearly what role each plays in creating and running a business that turns into a strong firm?
Yes, and actually, John, the way I would put it is we need maybe a few managers, but we need lots of leaders. And leaders are people that know how to work with people, My old partner, Bill Valentine, used to say, leaders have followers. Managers have a group of sheep that are led or managed. So if you're a manager and you tell somebody, do this or do that, they will do this or that. They will shut off their brain. They will not add to, they will not bring up suggestions to a manager. Maybe there's a different way we can do this better. A leader is the one that actually supports and encourages the people under his or her charge. So we use terms in architecture even today, project manager.
Yeah.
And I was a project manager in my career. I started as a designer, but quickly became a project manager. Project managers, really, there are a few things that you need to do to manage. You need to figure out a schedule. That's a management job. You need to figure out a budget for your team and how much you can spend each week or each month. That's a management job. But keeping your team going, making sure that the team has the information they need, is working harmoniously and running toward trouble, I call it, fixing problems before they get to be big problems, is the job of a leader. And I wish, in fact, we experimented at HOK for a period of time. Maybe we should call people project leaders instead of project managers, but we were going against tradition. And that finally, we gave up on that. But to me, project managers are junior leaders, and managing principals, which run offices, are really office leaders. They're not managers, because management it connotes the wrong thing. It's doing things by the numbers, and leaders, really, it's all about leading people.
Patrick, you mentioned earlier that there's the industry showing some signs of consolidation. And
Yeah.
as more firms expand, merge, add new disciplines, even get into stuff that they've never even thought of in the past,
Yes.
what's your advice about how they can grow and maintain their identity, their corporate culture, and their energy?
Yes. Okay. That is a key question. And I went through that at HOK. When I began at HOK, it was one office in St. Louis, Missouri. And when I left, with about 150 people. When I left, we were in 27 locations around the world, 4 continents, and about 2,000 people. And during that growth, especially after the founders had left the scene, either retired or, in the case of George Kassebaum, died suddenly, we had some real challenges with that growth, because people in new offices knew nothing about what we referred to as HOK culture. And HOK culture was the heart of the firm. It goes something like this. Let's all be like a big family inside the firm. Let's help each other to succeed. Because if we collaborate on the inside, there's plenty of competition on the outside. And the best way for us to compete on the outside is to collaborate inside. Well, the firm grew so fast, especially at the time George Kassebaum died suddenly in 1982, that new people in new offices had no idea of what we called HOK culture, and the firm began to tear itself apart. And the job of restoring HOK culture was a long, difficult journey, because we let it get out of hand. And it took and there were finally offices competing with one another, and offices hoarding work and not sharing work, even though, let's say, an office would win a new aviation project, a new airport design, on the strength of HOK's credentials, having no one in the office with credentials on how to design an airport. So, well, why don't you work with your office down the street or in the next state, because they have the experience? Well, we want the fee for ourselves. Changing that culture to be collaborative again, restoring it, was probably the hardest job I faced as a CEO. And how did we do it? We did it with a ton of communication. I traveled to every office twice a year for years, and gave Ask Me Anything talks, where I would talk to the leadership, but also the staff. And in plain talk, open the books of HOK, describe what was going on, so everybody knew the value of collaboration and the perils of a lack of collaboration. Then finally, we changed the compensation system. In the early days, for most firms, if they're doing well, give bonuses at the end of their fiscal year using the profits from that year. And HOK's bonus system was not unlike that. It was very formulaic, and the accountants would tell us we made $1 million or some number. Actually, it was a lot more than that in later years. And we would divide it up by office based on the profit that each office made. And the problem with that is it only rewarded profit. It didn't reward collaboration. It didn't reward great service to clients. It didn't reward a good design and so on. So we changed the bonus system to reward all those other things for the leaders, not for the regular staff people. So we made a special piece of the bonus pool just for office leaders. And we reviewed, it was much more laborious. The executive committee of the firm, a group of about 6 of us, each year would go through a very laborious review of each one of the leaders, about 80 people, and decide their bonus based on not just how much profit they made, but were they collaborative, did they support great design, and so on. And that finally did the trick.
Well, Patrick, thank you for sharing your insights and your recollections about your career. I wish you good luck as you move forward, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Okay. Have a good afternoon.